So first I'm just going to give a quick shout out to the new Twin Fantasy by Car Seat Headrest. I couldn't really decide if I wanted to put this album first on my list or just not include it at all. And I guess it's kind of a compromise, honorable mention type of thing. But I guess just while I think this album's excellent and it comes at these already released songs from a much more refined, much more mature perspective, not to mention, the fact that the entire album was re-recorded in an actual studio. It's just that, these songs have already come out. And from a songwriting perspective anyway, I've had years to digest these tracks and really let them resonate with me and let them sit with me in a way that kind of gives this album an unfair advantage if I'm listening it along with a bunch of albums that have had much less time to give. But regardless, it's amazing and it deserves our respect. God bless you, Will Toledo. So I'm just going to give two quick honorable mentions and I'll just kind of start rifling off the top 50. But my two honorable mentions are... what people call low self-esteem is really just people seeing you the way that other... Wait, hold on. Fuck. What people call low self-esteem is really just seeing yourself the way that other people see you, by Awake But Still in Bed. And then I'm also going to give an honorable mention to Room 25 by No Name. Alright, top 50. Here we go. Number 50, Earl Sweatshirt, Some Rap Songs. Number 49, Parquet Courts, Wide Awake. 48, Janelle Monáe, Dirty Computer. Number 47, Sons of Kemet, Your Queen is a Reptile. Number 46, Brockhampton with Iridescence. Number 45, King Tough, The Other. Number 44, Against All Logic, 2012 to 2017. Number 43, John Hopkins, Singularity. Number 42, Judas Priest, Firepower. Number 41, Deaf Heaven, Ordinary Corrupt Human Love. Number 40, Clarence Clarity, Think Peace. Number 39, Tom York, Suspiria. Number 38, Palm, Rock Island. Number 37, Beach House with Seven. Number 36, Rai with Blood. Number 35, Haru Namuri with Haru Tushura. Number 34, Melody's Echo Chamber with Bon Voyage. Number 33, Almond Dunes with Freedom. Number 32, Sleep, The Sciences. Number 31, Death Grips, Year of the Snitch. Number 30, Foxing, Nearer My God. Number 29, Julia Holter, Aviary. Number 28, Soccer Mommy, Clean. 27, Sophie, Oil of Every Pearl's Uninsides. Number 26, Anna von Hauswolf with Dead Magic. At number 25, Ty Segall and Freedom Band with Freedom's Goblin. Probably safe to say is my favorite Ty Segall album at this point. It's one of his longer, if not his longest album. It's at about 75 minutes, and it's just filled to the brim with these psychedelic, noisy, garage rock and glam rock tracks. It's very sonically coherent, and I think it has some of the most colorful and fun songs of his discography. At number 24, Rosalia with El Mal Querer. Definitely one of the most creative genre fusions I've come across this year. It's essentially flamenco pop, so you have all of this kind of traditional Spanish music instrumentation and vocal delivery, but it's met with these elements of art pop and R&B, and it's all put together in a really beautiful and really creative way. At number 23, Denzel Curry with Taboo. It's just a really dark, kind of aggressive hip-hop album. It's split into 3 parts that get progressively darker as the album goes along, and it just makes the whole project feel like a very engaging, holistic experience that's very easy to get lost in. Good stuff. At number 22, Avantdale Bowling Club's self-titled debut album, Avantdale Bowling Club. Another hip-hop album, but this time it's jazz-infused hip-hop. And when I say jazz-infused, I literally mean like it's jazz music infused with hip-hop music, not just hip-hop with like tinges of jazz going on. The album is just very introspective, kind of mellow, but it's filled with some amazing lyricism and an atmosphere that just suits it perfectly. Number 21, Superorganism with their self-titled debut album, Superorganism. And this one's kind of a divisive album, maybe a little too eccentric for its own good, but beneath all of its quirky strangeness, there's some genuinely good pop songs and some genuinely good pop songwriting in here. I love the very deadpan, kind of sarcastic vocal delivery and the very zany, idiosyncratic production style, while a turnoff for a lot of people is something that I've kind of come to appreciate over the year. Number 20, Lucy Dacus with Historian. Not a lot to say here, just a really solid set of indie rock, chamber pop material. Lucy Dacus has an amazing voice, sure it's amazing lyrics, and this album is just so consistent. Ugh. Number 19, Casey Musgraves with Golden Hour. Yeehaw. Number 18, Jeff Rosenstock with Post. Despite Jeff's last album having the literal title Worry, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Post is probably his most anxious and neurotic set of songs yet. This album's just as much about worrying about stuff as pretty much any other album you could find. You know, worrying about politics, worrying about the country, worrying about relationships, worrying about depression, worrying about worrying too much. This album is basically just like one big ball of nervous energy, and it uses that energy to make some of Jeff's punchiest and most kick-ass songs to date.
Number 17, Ichiko Aoba with QP. It's just a very ethereal, very soft, soothing, and mellow Japanese folk album. Makes me want to go into the forest and meditate.
Number 16, The Voids with Virtue. At this point, The Voids interest me a lot more than The Strokes do, and this album kind of solidifies that for me. It's just a really colorful, strange, and vibrant cavalcade of rock, pop, punk, and psychedelic music, and it's just really exciting and good. Number 15, Quiero Quiero Bonito with Time and Place. This album's just crazy, man. It's like filled with these really sugary and catchy hooks, super crisp pop production, a lot of tinges of hip-hop and whatnot, but there's also like heavy distorted electric guitars and a lot of moments where it's just dipping into entirely different genres, but it does this all without really sacrificing any of the group's pop ethos that made their previous output enjoyable to begin with. Basically an album that just strikes a great balance between experimentation and sticking to your strengths. Number 14, Pusha T with Daytona. Short album, just over 20 minutes I think, but insanely concise and airtight. Not a bad track on here. Kanye's got some great, incredibly crisp production on this thing, and although this album could fit pretty squarely under the, hardcore hip-hop umbrella, it's still very atmospheric and lush. And, that's not to say that the production sands off any of the edge to these tracks. It's still very nocturnal and dark, and Push's lyrics obviously work to sharpen the emotion these tracks have, but it's just a very well-rounded hip-hop album in a lot of ways, I guess. Very good. Number 13, Kids See Ghosts, self-titled album, Kids See Ghosts. Kanye's an idiot, but this album's good, so. Number 12, Tropical Fuckstorm with A Laughing Death in Meat Space. Sister project of the Drones, another band I'm a big fan of. And this album is just controlled chaos down to a science. For the most part, it operates in what could be considered punk music. It's very noisy, raw, rebellious, angry, but there's a lot more at play too. The songwriting eschews a lot of the typical punk music conventions people think about. The songs are a bit longer. They're more abstract and structurally complicated than most punk music, and the heavier, rockier elements are supplemented with many of the same electronic elements that have been showing up on some of the more recent Drones output. Some very vivid and distraught lyricism as well. A lot of political unrest, and yeah, it's a cool album. Back off. Number 11, Mitski with Be the Cowboy. Just the perfect fusion of art pop and indie rock with some of the catchiest, most riveting hooks of the year, which is interesting when you take Mitski's last album into account, which had a much stronger emphasis on the rock side of this spectrum. But let me tell you, this cleaned up production style works for her. These songs are just as sentimental and lonely as anything on Puberty 2 or whatever, but there's just so many more musical ideas here, which is crazy considering this album is just like 30 minutes long. This is also the album that jumped up at the most spots from when I first listened to it until now, so who knows, maybe in 2020 this will be the 2018 album of the year. At number 10, Natalia Lafourcade with Musas Volume 2. Just some beautiful Mexican folk music, very instrumentally lush and colorful. There's just so many different styles going on within this kind of Latin American music framework. Some songs are just these stripped down acoustic tracks, and some include like a full ensemble of instruments. And it just does an amazing job of sounding both very traditional and also like something that's relevant and enjoyable to listen to in 2018. Que música buenísima. So at number 9, we have Saba with Care For Me. I believe this is my number 1 hip-hop album of the year, and it kind of flew under the radar for a lot of people, which is a shame because it's excellent. A lot of focus went into the atmosphere of this thing. It's very smooth, it's very jazzy, a lot of tinges of soul, a lot of melody throughout, but it still has the kind of heavy-hitting beats and production of any great modern hip-hop album. The lyrics are pretty heavy, they're pretty introspective, very personal, And the album itself is just one of the more engaging and emotionally affecting projects that I have heard this year. At number 8, Hop Along with Bark Your Head Off, Dog. Not a lot to say here, just a damn solid indie rock album. It's musically engaging, there are a lot of cool production choices, especially with all the chamber pop string arrangements scattered throughout. It's emotionally poignant, and all while being really catchy and just all around interesting. And given Hopalong's kind of emo roots, I was initially expecting / hoping for something with a little more edge to it, but this album just does so many other interesting things within the structure of indie rock that I don't really care at all. It's just a through and through good collection of songs that strike an excellent balance between being emotive and being musically refreshing. At number 7, we have MGMT with Little Dark Age. MGMT is in kind of a weird place in terms of like critical and fan reception because their discography is scattered with some of the best psychedelic music of this generation, which is something I don't think is that crazy of an opinion to have. Yet much of their work is still very divisive because, while they've had all these amazing singles, I think a lot of people have just been waiting for the band to pull it together for an entire album. And I think this album is that. It's just as sonically interesting as anything they've ever released. The psychedelic soundscapes that they're so renowned for constructing are as prevalent as ever. It's filled with these vibrant synths, synthetic bass, horns, keys, basically anything they can get their hands on to add to the already very surreal atmosphere. And they also didn't really sacrifice any of their pop sensibility. There's incredibly catchy melodies and instrumental motifs all over this thing. And in addition to that, the accompanying lyrics are a great mixture of like the dark and tongue-in-cheek kind of. There are tender moments, there are bizarre moments, but nothing seems out of place or unnecessary. And I guess if there's an MGMT album that everyone can finally and unequivocally be on the same page about, this wouldn't be a bad choice. So at number 6, Father John Misty with God's Favorite Customer. At this point, to me, Father John Misty has got to be one of the most consistently good artists of the decade. He's not necessarily a boundary pusher or someone who's going to reinvent a genre or anything like that, but his discography is just filled to the brim with songwriting that manages to be simultaneously incredibly witty and emotionally poignant. And on top of that, the singer-songwriter Americana folk sound in which he typically operates is something that I think he pulls off really well. Obviously last year's Pure Comedy was somewhat of a divisive album. A lot of people criticized it for either being too slow and boring and filled with these melancholic piano ballads, but a lot of people just thought it was really pretentious and kind of up its own ass. And I don't know, I think with God's Favorite Customer, a lot of those concerns will be quelled for the people who haven't completely written him off yet. For one, the album essentially ditches the cold, bare-bones sonics of Pure Comedy in favor of an instrumental palette that's very lively and very energetic. There's more electric guitar on this album than anything Father John Misty has really done since Fear Fun. But there's also a good deal of slow burners and tracks with that raw emotional edge. As a matter of fact, despite its lively presentation, I would say that this very well might be Josh's most emotionally brutal album yet. The album tells stories in this kind of narrative-like fashion, describing a seemingly rough period of Josh's life as he's struggling with fame, his relationship with his music, his relationship with his wife, and just his own mental health in general. Josh himself described it as his quote-unquote heartbreak album, and it's really not hard to pick up on that when listening to these songs. Just another overall great collection of tracks from this man, and I'm going to continue being a big fan. So at number 5, Idols with Joy as an Act of Resistance. This is a weird album for me to have here personally because I'm often not that big a fan of much of the modern post-punk music out there. I think a lot of it's just kind of boring and dreary without really offering much musically to keep me engaged. But this album's just a different story. If anything, it reinforces the thoughts I already had about the genre by proving that it does, in fact, have the capacity to be great, and there are just a lot of people out there doing it wrong. For one, the sonic range on this album is excellent. It just does such a good job of mixing punk's dark and foreboding elements with its energy and its humor. There's never a stretch of tracks where nothing really happens, but it's also not overwhelmingly loud and chaotic. And second, this album is just plain fun. There's a lot of tongue-in-cheek references and fun lyrical moments, but the songs themselves are written in such a captivatingly anthemic way that you just want to jump around and scream along with every second, basically. And I guess that's one of the biggest, most consistent issues I have with post-punk albums in general, is just that they take themselves way too seriously. They're just kind of dismal and melodramatic, but without any of the actual sonic creativity or lyrical skill to back it up. But this album, on the other hand, is just ridiculously fun, playful, strange, eccentric, and just mesmerizingly entertaining. I don't think any other album this year has really exceeded my expectations as much as this one has. And to me, that's one of the most exciting things about following new music like this. At number 4, Caliuchis with Isolation. I think I'm becoming kind of a sucker for anyone with a unique take on R&B music, and this album meets that criteria very comfortably. I can't give much in the way of a background. This is my first exposure to Caliuchis, but I can talk about all the cool things on this album, and there are actually quite a lot. Like I said, the contemporary R&B is certainly the frame around which most of these songs are built, but this album really has a way of stretching those boundaries in a number of interesting ways. There's a lot of pop, hip-hop, funk, even psychedelic music sprinkled throughout these tracks, and they all somehow mix together in a really coherent way. The vocal delivery is incredibly soulful throughout the entire album, and it does a wonderful job adding to the already very lush, very sensual atmosphere. And the lyrics on this album are another definite highlight. There's a lot about the relationship between artists and their fans, dealing with success and fame, coming to terms with the past, and looking to the future in a positive way. All in all, just an incredibly solid album. Sonically, one of the most engaging and creative albums I've come across this year, full of profound lyricism as well. It's just track after track of gold, and it excites me in a way that I guess a lot of other albums this year didn't. At number 3, Mid-Air Thief with Crumbling. This is my designated obscure top 10 pick this year, but guys, it's so good. It's just so good. It's basically just like a beautifully lush concoction of psychedelic folk, electronica, dream pop, even some like folk rock, but it never comes across as like too scatterbrained or carelessly structured. The songs flow incredibly well, both internally and within their place in the track list, and the way it's able to kind of jump from sound to sound and idea to idea seems like it should be disorienting, but it actually just adds a lot of texture and color to these songs. Just a way out of left field release that kind of caught me off guard with its creativity and just its engagingness. It does an amazing job of striking a delicate balance between its serene and nearly pastoral folk elements, but also with its vividly kaleidoscopic electronic ones. It's just been a while since an album has so unexpectedly entranced me, and I love finding something new every time I dive into its strangeness. So at number 2, we have Daughters with You Won't Get What You Want. And since there's no real linguistic equivalent to punching a hole in my bedroom wall, I'm just going to start this review like this. Because there's really not a lot I can do to convey just how intense this album is. You Won't Get What You Want has got to be one of the most viscerally and aggressively loud albums I've ever heard. Like, no joke. Nearly every track operates at such a high level of energy that listening to it is a borderline physical experience. It's just so impossibly heavy right from the start, and then it just keeps getting heavier, and then you think it can't get any heavier, and then it just keeps getting heavier. It's crazy. It's madness. And the lyrics are awesome, too. I haven't even mentioned those. They're just, like, these really dark and misanthropic, like... How do you say that word? Misanthropic? They're that. And fittingly enough, many of these songs deal with just the incredibly dark side of the human psyche. They're kind of these abstract and nihilistic takes on anxiety and anger and depression and hate, and it just lets them all out in one big cathartic ball to just fester out in the open, as unrestrained as musically possible. Now, is this an album that I'm going to just casually toss on every day? Probably not, just for my own physical safety, but that's not the fault of the songwriting or the production or really anything to do with the music itself, just the fact that an album as intense as this really warrants some level of mental preparation, or at least some base level masochism, and as far as I'm concerned, any album that powerful is a great one. And number 1 album of 2018, Mount Eerie with Now Only. That's right, Mount Eerie, album of the year, 2 years in a row. Fight me. I'm just not sure that there's any other artist who is so vividly able to capture the darkest of human emotions. And this could obviously just be a reference to A Crow Looked at Me, but all throughout Phil's massive discography, he's been able to craft songs with an exceptional level of sharp emotional poignancy. A lot of his work as both The Microphones and Mount Eerie, while incredibly sonically varied, shared a lot of themes regarding life, death, love, nature, existentialism, and while those albums are excellent, some of my favorite albums of all time, and certainly laid the groundwork / informed the songwriting and production habits that Phil probably still holds, it's hard not to think that these last 2 albums are kind of a separate thing, or that they exist in a different musical era for Phil. I've already talked at length about A Crow Looked at Me, but much of what makes that album so special is just how it wholeheartedly abandons so many songwriting conventions in the name of just authentic emotional release. And I'm sure the majority of the people here are familiar with Phil's backstory these last few years, so I won't get too much into that, but A Crow Looked at Me is basically documentation of how Phil felt during, like literally during that traumatizing period of his life. Now Only is obviously a follow-up to A Crow Looked at Me. It's still thematically centered around the death of Genevieve, and it's still very emotionally blunt. The lyrics, like on the last album, are very conversational or kind of prose-like, still not much metaphor or symbolism, still very personal, almost diaristic, you could say. But what is different, however, is the scope and the perspective of these songs, where A Crow Looked at Me dwells in the horror of the present. Now Only seems to be Phil kind of starting to try to look into the future. A lot of the lyrics obviously directly pertain to his wife, but there are a lot more anecdotes about their past together, happy memories, and kind of the formation of their relationship in the beginning rather than the melancholy and grief at the end. He doesn't necessarily aim to move on, but rather to kind of try and reach some level of peace in the unstoppable forward progression of time. And with a slightly different thematic perspective, the album bears some sonic differences as well. It's certainly still a folk album, and acoustic guitar is still the primary instrument here, but the production is a lot more filled out. There's a lot more kind of tangible percussion. There's a lot more electronic, or not electronic, like electric elements, like electric guitar. And, you know, between this album and A Crow Looked at Me, it's just like we're getting an incredibly intimate look at the human grieving cycle in real time. A Crow Looked at Me was the immediate aftermath of the situation, and Now Only kind of represents new struggles from a new point in time, a little further removed, a little farther down the road, but still constantly affected by these things. Perhaps the visceral waves of sadness are less frequent, but even that in and of itself can be kind of hard to come to terms with. And the fact that I, someone who has clearly not experienced any of these things, am even able to come to a conclusion like this is really a testament to the incredible songwriting. Phil knows how to convey emotion, no matter how heavy, in the most sincere and honest terms possible, and without sacrificing any musical quality or creativity or anything. I'm not particularly surprised that I like this album so much, but I think Phil proves more and more with each release that he is worthy of being pinned as one of the all-time greats in songwriting. Anyway, thank you for all watching my video. I'll see you next year.